Imagine a Jerusalem both resplendent and enigmatic, where every street, every stone seems to whisper tales of power, sin, and the judgment of the divine. In the heart of the kingdom of Israel, a woman named Bathsheba was swept into a fateful tale. A single glance, a fleeting moment, plunged her into a whirlwind of blind desire, treacherous schemes, and costly consequences that shook the entire court. What happened on that fateful rooftop when King David's gaze fell upon her? How could an ordinary woman become the focal point of such a harrowing tragedy, to the extent that even the king fell to his knees, begging the Almighty for mercy? And most importantly, how can the Lord transform the darkest mistakes of the soul into the light of salvation? Prepare your soul carefully, for this story is not merely history, but a haunting warning about sin, repentance, and God's grand plan, one you cannot ignore. Bathsheba was born into a family whose fate seemed intertwined with the most pivotal events of Israel. Eliah belonged to the Cha County group, renowned as one of King David's most elite warriors. These brave men devoted their entire lives to protecting the kingdom. Ko's grandfather, Elder Itophel, was a wise and learned advisor whose words carried great weight among the powerful. At that time, families like the Ko household lived in the whirlwind of duty and honor, yet at the same time bore the immense pressure of courtly expectations and schemes. Imagine, Jerusalem at that time was truly bustling and vibrant. This city is as if every stone silently whispers tales of royal dynasties, heroic battles, and faith in a future under the protection of the divine. Bathsheba grew up in that very space, steeped in tales of the chosen people and the victories that elevated Israel into a mighty kingdom. She must have been a young woman with a restless soul, like so many of her time, brimming with dreams yet keenly aware of the responsibilities tied to her position. According to the customs of the Ko clan, Bathsheba was married at a young age to Uriah, a man of honor. Like her father, he served King David as a loyal warrior. The two lived in Jerusalem, a place close to the royal palace yet equally near to the perils and tragedies of the kingdom's powerful figures. Every step she took felt watched, in a world that always demanded more from those bound to the throne. Her life had been peaceful behind the scenes of the stage, but on what seemed like an ordinary day, an unexpected event struck, forever altering the course of her fate. Everything began like an ordinary day, with the sun shining over Jerusalem, its golden rays gleaming upon the rooftops. While the daily lives of the people passed by peacefully, within the king's palace, all activities continued as bustling as ever. The girls kept coming and going without pause, messengers continuously bringing news from the battlefield. But for Sheba, it was just another peaceful day like any other in her home. While Uriah's husband is fighting for Israel far away, she remains dedicated to her daily tasks, tending to household chores and seizing rare moments of relaxation in her private space. When the summer heat grew stifling, she took a bath to wash away the discomfort. The moment of bathing is a private time, a rare moment of tranquility amid the hustle and bustle of life. But at that very moment, she had no idea that an upcoming event would change her fate forever. From the high palace, King David stepped out onto the balcony, perhaps to relax his mind, or simply to gaze upon the capital he ruled. He suddenly caught sight of her, and the sight of Mrs. Sheba captivated him so completely that he couldn't tear his eyes away. The sunlight danced playfully on her skin through the water, radiating serenity in every movement. Everything seemed to merge into one, holding him back, making it impossible for him to tear his gaze away. King David was all too familiar with power and the desires it brings. But at that very moment, his greed had crossed the line of reason. He didn't know who she was, but something unassuming in her demeanor, perhaps the essence of that very moment, made him determined to learn more. King David sent messengers to summon her to the palace. The envoys were dispatched discreetly to avoid arousing suspicion. When she appeared, it was not merely a woman standing before the king. It was the beginning of a decision that would alter the fate of them both. When brought to the palace, Bathsheba could not guess the true motive behind this summons. It was King David himself who summoned her, and for any Israelite, the king's command cannot be refused. She passed through the majestic city gates, her heart swelling with a mix of curiosity and reverence. The air in the palace still carried its usual grandeur, but that night held something unusual within it. The atmosphere sank into an eerie silence, as if even the corridors were holding their breath, anxiously awaiting what was about to unfold. When they met King David, they began their conversation with warm, gentle words. He is renowned for his irresistible charm, which explains why he is so deeply respected by many. But in that moment, King David's gaze held something far deeper, a glimmer that went beyond mere curiosity. He treated her like someone special, as if in that moment, she was the only one worthy of his undivided attention. Perhaps Bathsheba felt confused, even slightly overwhelmed, but she couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation. The time they spent together was long enough to erase all distance between them. That night, King David and Bathsheba succumbed to the temptation of lust. At first, it was merely a routine meeting between the king and his vassal, yet soon it unraveled into an unfathomable mystery. Both knew it couldn't be spoken aloud. She was a married woman, and King David, despite all his power, understood full well that he had violated God's law and the laws of his people. A few days later, the tension grew even thicker when Bathsheba sent a letter to the king. Her message was brief, yet laden with unspoken emotions. "I'm pregnant." King David, who until then might have thought he could continue without facing serious consequences. Now I realize that my decision sparked something far beyond what I had ever imagined. His next action would not only determine Bathsheba's fate but also shape the destiny of the entire kingdom. When Bathsheba's letter reached King David, its message weighed heavily on his heart like a stone pressing upon his chest. "I'm pregnant." Simple, straightforward, impossible to ignore. He clearly understood that this news would not only damage his personal reputation but also risk destroying everything he had painstakingly built. How can one justify committing adultery with the wife of Uriah, one of the most loyal men in the kingdom? The solution was far from simple, but the fear of being exposed drove him to act hastily and desperately. King David summoned Uriah from the battlefield, using the pretext of wanting to inquire about the progress of the war. When Uriah arrived at the palace, his lingering suspicion never faded. He is an honest man, loyal to his king, to his comrades, and steadfast to his wife. But King David devised a plan. He told Uriah to go home, rest, and be with his wife, hoping that the child would later be recognized as Uriah's. This is a highly risky strategy, but King David remains confident that if successful, all issues will be smoothly resolved. However, Uriah refused. When King David suggested that he return home to rest, eat his fill, and sleep in his own bed, he firmly declined. "How could I do that when my comrades are sound asleep in their tents on the battlefield?" He spoke with such a resolute tone that even the king was taken aback. Uriah stayed overnight with the palace guard, unaware that his integrity had thwarted King David's scheme. The king tried another approach, this time summoning Uriah to drink wine freely, hoping that once drunk, he would return home to his wife. But once again, Uriah remained steadfast in his principles. Each failure pushed King David into a corner, making him realize he could no longer easily conceal his mistakes. With his mind clouded by fear and guilt, he made a fateful decision, one that would forever alter Uriah's destiny. The loyal warrior held in his hand the king's sealed letter, never suspecting it was his own death sentence. Uriah held the letter like a loyal soldier, unaware that the very paper concealed his own fate. How cruel, almost ironic, to think that a man as honorable as you would hand the opportunity to Joab yourself. The military commander, following direct orders from the king, paid the ultimate price with his own life. Place Uriah at the front of the fiercest battle, then withdraw the troops, leaving him to be wounded and die. S. Blade, King David. On the battlefield, Uriah fought with all his might, fueled by his familiar fiery passion, unaware that the schemes woven behind his back had already begun to unfold. The battle raged with brutal intensity, volleys of arrows whistling through the air like the piercing shrieks of metal. Joab obeyed the king's command, sending Uriah into the fiercest part of the battle, where there was almost no chance of survival. Uriah walked like a true warrior, steadfast, fearless, and utterly loyal to his last breath. He collapsed amid the hail of bullets, surrounded by enemies and betrayed by his own comrades, those who should have protected him. When David heard the news of Uriah's death, he received it with indifference. Perhaps he breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that with Uriah gone, the secret would remain hidden. "Don't grieve, the sword spares no one," as if he were trying to justify the tragedy, using alcohol to numb the guilt with meaningless words. After the mourning period, King David hastily married Bathsheba, using marriage as a facade to conceal his sins. But God cannot be deceived by his actions. The prophet Nathan was sent to the palace, bearing a message as sharp as an arrow, meant to expose the truth. And before the king lay the weight of his own decisions. When the prophet Nathan entered the palace, the atmosphere suddenly grew oppressive, as if an invisible weight pressed down upon the space. He is a revered figure, known for his forthright speech when speaking on behalf of God. King David likely greeted him with a feigned smile and outward calm, but Nathan delivered a message that left the king utterly stunned. He didn't start with direct accusations, but skillfully led through a simple story, a seemingly unrelated parable. In a certain city, there were two men. A wealthy man with a large flock of sheep and cattle. That poor man had only one small lamb, which he loved as dearly as his own daughter. He cradles the sunlight, letting it slumber in his embrace. That is all that belongs to him. One day, a rich man hosted a feast. Instead of slaughtering a sheep from his own abundant flock, he took the only sheep of a poor man to prepare the meal. When the prophet Nathan told the story, King David listened intently, and his heart suddenly burned with anger. That rich man must die. King David was consumed by rage. How dare he act like that? He must pay 4 times over for what he's done, for he showed not an ounce of mercy. At that moment, the air seemed to freeze. Nathan stared straight at King David with a resolute gaze, sending an involuntary shiver down the king's spine. "It is you." King David stood frozen, each of Nathan's words like a sharp blade piercing straight into his heart. Then, the prophecy unveiled the whole truth. The Lord saw through all of King David's sins, his adultery with Bathsheba, his role in Uriah's death, and his futile attempts to conceal the truth. His judgment is clear. The consequences will surely come to pass. The child in Bathsheba. Nathan's words struck King David to the core. At last, he suddenly grasped the grave consequences of his actions. But the declaration of punishment was only the beginning of the long days of suffering he and Bathsheba were forced to endure together. When their child was born, Nathan's prophecy gradually unfolded in a dark and unstoppable atmosphere. The birth of King David and Queen Bathsheba's son stirred mixed emotions of joy and anxiety within the palace. But that happiness was fleeting, like a candle newly lit only to be swiftly snuffed out by a cold wind. The child fell gravely ill, and Nathan's haunting prophecy loomed over everything like a dark shadow. In his despair, King David fell to his knees on the ground, fasted, and prayed fervently. He abstained from food, denied himself sleep, and pleaded day and night for God to have mercy on his son. Perhaps he thought that if he repented enough, the punishment would be revoked. Bathsheba quietly withdrew into a corner of the palace, alone with her hidden sorrow. It was a grief too deep for anyone to fully understand. Not only was she afraid of losing her child, but she was also tormented by the thought of the child bearing the consequences of her own and King David's mistakes. The days passed by slowly, the entire palace submerged in a gloomy darkness. Not even the resplendent golden glow of the throne was enough to dispel it. However, the illness did not relent, and the child did not survive. When the servants brought the news to King David, they expected him to be even more grief-stricken and despairing. But surprisingly, King David got up, washed his face, put on new clothes, and went to the temple to worship God. The servants were bewildered and didn't understand. Why now, when the child had already died, would he do such a thing? They wondered. While the child was still alive, I wept and pleaded with God, hoping he would show mercy. But now it has gone far away, I can no longer call it back. One day, I will seek it out, but it can never return to my side again. This profound loss carves deep wounds in the heart, yet at the same time, it marks a turning point in King David's soul and the fate of Bathsheba. When a boy is born, it is not just a symbol of hope, but also a sincere promise that amid ruins, new life can still flourish. Solomon, chosen by God, was destined to become a king even greater than his father, King David, upon the throne. The birth of Solomon brought an unexpected, radiant light to the palace of King David and Queen Bathsheba. Unlike the firstborn, who entered the world under the weight of divine judgment, Solomon was welcomed with joy and the promise of salvation. From a young age, the boy radiated an extraordinary and unique aura. This was further confirmed when the prophet Nathan, a messenger of God, declared that the Lord had bestowed upon him a special love. Beloved of the Lord, it seems Solomon brings a new opportunity, not only for his parents but also for the entire kingdom. Bathsheba, who had endured so many ups and downs, found in Solomon a new reason to carry on. She cared for the boy with great devotion, knowing in her heart that he was not only her son but also carried within him a grand mission. Meanwhile, life in the palace continued, rife with schemes and power struggles among King David's princes. Everyone is vying fiercely for a position in the race to inherit the throne. Wives, Bathsheba was constantly reminded that the path to securing Solomon. Time slipped away swiftly, King David grew increasingly frail, and the whispers about his successor to the throne grew more fervent than ever. Adonijah, one of King David's eldest sons, was so confident he was the heir to the throne that he acted like a true king. He threw a lavish feast, rallied allies, and built his own power base. But Bathsheba did not back down, firmly securing Solomon's future. The days in the palace were tense, yet Adonijah brimmed with confidence, carrying himself as if the throne rightfully belonged to him. He gathered powerful allies, organized a lavish banquet, and invited high-ranking commanders, clergy, and influential figures of the court to attend, all to strengthen his position. That was a courageous act, and everyone understood that this was not just an ordinary ceremony. He proclaimed himself king while David grew increasingly frail with age, gradually neglecting the affairs of the court. But amidst that storm, Bathsheba did not hesitate. She knew she had to act immediately to secure Solomon's future. With the help of the prophet Nathan, who often represented the will of heaven in the kingdom, she devised a meticulous plan. While Adonijah was striving to gather his forces, Bathsheba entered the king's chamber, where King David lay resting. Though frail and in failing health, he still bore the dignified air of a monarch. In a calm yet resolute tone, she reminded King David of his long-ago promise. "Your Majesty, my lord the king, you swore before the God of Israel that Solomon, my son, would succeed to the throne. However, Adonijah has now declared himself king. If this continues, when you are no longer here, Solomon and I will be treated as enemies." Her voice was brimming with emotion, yet concealed shrewd calculation. She understood that even in his weakened state, King David recognized the significance of this decisive moment. As soon as she finished speaking, the prophet Nathan entered, confirming her words and emphasizing the urgency of the situation. King David listened to them both, gradually regaining some of the commanding presence of his legendary past. He decided to summon his advisors and issued a clear command. Solomon would ascend to the throne that very day. "You will ride on the back of a royal donkey, led throughout Jerusalem and proclaimed before all the people." When news from King David spread, the palace was filled with both joy and confusion. Adonijah and his conspirators were startled when they heard the uproar of cheering from the city. Suddenly, the lively banquet they had prepared fell into an eerie silence. But for Bathsheba, that moment was merely the beginning of her new role, a companion beside the throne. When Solomon ascended the throne, his radiance seemed to dispel the shroud of conspiracy darkening the kingdom's command. Solomon was anointed as king in the presence of all the people. The sound of trumpets resounded throughout Jerusalem, signaling the fulfillment of God. From a young age, the prince, now king, was welcomed with joy and cheers. Even those who had once supported Adonijah came to realize that opposing the new king meant defying the sacred will of the gods. Bathsheba, having weathered the many ups and downs of life, had now become the queen mother, a figure of great power and reverence in the royal court. In this position, she not only served as Solomon's advisor but also became a symbol of strength and liberation. Though bearing the marks of the past, her role is clearly to maintain the kingdom's stability while supporting her son in fulfilling the great mission ahead. From the moment he ascended the throne, Solomon stood apart. He did not seek power or riches, but first asked God to grant him wisdom. In the dream, when the Lord appeared, the boy did not ask for wealth or power, but only wished for wisdom to rule the people with justice. That is not just a plea to please God, but also a continuation of the legacy that King David and Bathsheba left for him. The wisdom of Solomon was renowned throughout the world, and his reign was marked by an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity in Israel's history. But even amidst the dazzling brilliance of the new era, the memory of the arduous journey endured remains vivid. Beneath Bathsheba's every footstep in the palace, the stones seemed to echo whispers from a distant past. From the rooftop where he was caught by King David, to the confrontation between the prophet Nathan and the king, from the tears shed for his firstborn son, to the joy of Solomon's coronation. Here are the two translation options as requested. She started out as just an ordinary woman, but then got swept into a chain of events that changed her fate forever. However, what makes her journey so powerful lies not only in what she has been through, but also in the person she has grown into because of it. Bathsheba endured moments of agony, her eyes brimming with tears and her heart shattered. But instead of being defeated by those hardships, she found the strength to rise up with a greater ideal, to change the destiny of the nation of Israel. Her life taught us a lesson: no one is beyond redemption. Though sometimes seen as a pawn in the game of power, the meditative queen still quietly writes her own story, weaving things far greater. Her role was as the mother of Solomon, the wisest king of Israel, and also a link in the lineage leading to Jesus, the Savior. This shows that God not only restores, but also uses the most complex moments of our lives to fulfill His plan. The story also conveys a meaningful lesson about repentance and compassion. Bathsheba and King David both had to face their own choices and bear the consequences, but their story does not end there. The pain of losing their firstborn child profoundly changed their lives. They realized that, even when people stumble, God's love and mercy remain steadfast above all else. No matter how far one may wander, the Lord always opens His arms wide to offer salvation and grant fresh new beginnings. Finally, Bathsheba showed us the power of patience and wisdom. Protect Solomon, fight for his future, and ensure the Lord's plan is fulfilled. Though imperfect, her story is a vivid testament to how God uses ordinary people to accomplish great purposes. Ultimately, her life was not defined by her mistakes, but by the grace that made her a pillar of strength and faith for the kingdom of Israel. Her journey is a profound reminder of how God can use each person's life, even in the most difficult times, to accomplish great things far beyond our imagination. S story and want to explore more journeys of faith and resilience, Dawn.